School, we are going to talk today about ratios, and to do that I'm going to make some bread. Now, it's my morning, it might not be your morning, and I have to talk a little bit quieter because I got some kids sleeping right now. But today it's really important that we learn a couple words. We're going to learn scaling, so scaling forward and scaling backward. We're going to learn about equivalent ratios and double number lines. We're also going to work with some ratio tables. And I'm going to make some bread, so let's get started right now. Alright, so I have some bread dough right here that's been in the refrigerator all night, and it is ready to go, so we're going to put that in the oven, and then we're going to make another batch together. So now I have 3 loaves of bread that are ready to go into the oven. As soon as that oven heats up, we will put that in. So while we are waiting for the oven to warm up, we're going to make another batch of bread with dough. So let's get all of our ingredients together. Alright, so here's what we're going to put into our bread today. White flour, whole wheat flour, we have a cup of spent salt, and we have yeast. And that's it. That's everything that is going to go into our bread. Alright, now I'm going to let this sit out on the counter for about 8 hours to let it ferment and rise. And now the oven is warm and ready, so we're going to take this and put this in the oven. While that is waiting in the oven, let's go downstairs and talk about ratios. Alright, Washington Middle School, we are going to get into ratios today. So I want you to think about a question. The question is, how can I use a model to find equivalent ratios? Now, our words today that we are talking about, remember those words, are equivalent ratios. So a ratio is a comparison of two numbers. How they compare, how those two quantities compare to each other is a ratio. Equivalent ratios are two ratios that are of equal value. How can I use a model to find equivalent ratios? Well, in our problem right now, we have 5 cups of white flour. Well, how can we use a model to show 5 cups of white flour? You know, we can just draw it out. So now we've got 5 cups of white flour. Not the best cup measure, but you get the picture there. What are we comparing that to? We're working with yeast. So we have 5 cups of white flour for every 1.5 tablespoons of yeast. What is an equivalent ratio to 5 to 1.5? Well, let's just add that again. So if I did 5 cups of flour, and I had another 1.5 tablespoons of yeast. In total, now I have 10 cups of flour to 3, because 1, 2, and then a half plus a half is 3. 10 to 3 is equivalent to 5 to 1.5. They are equivalent ratios. So we've got a model, we've drawn this out to show equivalent ratios. Today we're going to learn 2 more models to learn equivalent ratios. One of those is called a double number line, and the other one is called a ratio table. Alright, so our question today, how much yeast do I need to make 2 loaves of bread? To get to that, we are going to start off with a ratio table. That is, a ratio table is that way to model out equivalent ratios. So we're going to have... Alright, so a table is not a table like you eat on, but a mathematical table has spaces to put our information into. So when we had 1 loaf of bread, well, we don't know how much flour and yeast we need. To make 2 loaves of bread, again, we do not know how much flour and yeast we need. To make 3 loaves of bread, yeah, we've got that information because that is what I am making right now. I've got 5 cups of white flour. I have 1.5 tablespoons of yeast to make our 3 loaves of bread. So the question is, how much yeast do I need to make 2 loaves of bread? Well, to get there, we are going to use a process called scaling. Scaling means to make things bigger or to make things smaller. So we scale forward we multiply to make things bigger, and we scale backwards, we divide to make things smaller. And we're trying to find equivalent ratios by scaling forward or scaling backward. Now to find the answer to that question, are we going to have to scale forward or backward? Yeah, we're going to scale backwards. We're going to go to 2. But I find this easier to do if I scale first down to 1 loaf of bread. So we're going to scale all the way down, and we're going to scale to 1. And 3 divided by what equals 1? That's right, 3 divided by 3 is 1, because 1 times 3 is 3, so 3 divided by 3 is 1. So if I want to make 1 loaf of bread, then I'm going to have to scale everything down by 3. I'm going to have to divide every single thing that all my ingredients, I'm going to divide them by 3 to make 1 loaf of bread. So I can just do that pretty easily. I can divide 5 divided by 3, and I get 1 whole, because 3/3 is 1 whole, and I have 2/3 left over. 1 whole and 2/3. So to make 1 loaf of bread, I have 1 and 2/3 of a cup of flour to make that 1 loaf of bread. How much yeast do I need? Well, I'm just going to divide 1½ divided by 3, and I get 1/2, right? Because 1/2 plus 1/2 plus 1/2 equals 1½ So divide that by 3, and I get 1/2. Now you're not going to have to do things with fractions like I'm doing right now. I'm trying to do a problem with something that I do in my normal life, but you are going to do this with numbers that you don't have to do so much work with today. Now that we know how much flour and how much yeast it takes to make 1 loaf of bread, how am I going to find out how much to make 2 loaves of bread? I can just double everything. So times 2 and times 2. I'm going to double everything to make those 2 loaves of bread. When I multiply, that's called scaling forward. So we scaled backwards, and then we scaled forwards. So 1 2/3 times 2 is the same as, again, 5/3. And say 5/3 times 2 equals 10/3. And 10/3 is 3/3, and 3/3, and 3/3, that's 9, and then 1/3 left over. So I have 3 1/3 cup of flour. And of course, 1/2 times 2 is 1, right? I have a half of something, now I have 2 halves of something, I have 1 whole. So how much yeast do I need to make 2 loaves of bread? Well, I just need 1 tablespoon of yeast. So I can scale backwards and I can scale forward. Oh yes, alright, turn that off, and look at that. There is nothing quite like fresh bread. Yeah, alright. Ratios, they taste delicious.